Today I'm going to have a co-host if he gets his internet back on.
Okay.
So in the beginning, we was going to talk this past weekend, but then I was busy, so I was like, oh well, let's bring him in. But yeah, Mark, you're the man from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, and you also have the podcast Illuminati Confirmed.
Yes. Is that where you first found me? Illuminati confirmed on YouTube.
Actually, not. I was listening to My Family Thinks I'm Crazy.
Mm,
The
cool.
Illuminati confirmed. It's coming on the same RSS feed, so I have been listening on that. I'm just a podcast listener, so I don't watch much stuff.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, we just started doing live YouTube shows each 2 Tuesdays a month. So tomorrow we'll be doing our next live stream. But all of that goes to the audio show anyway, so you won't miss out. Hey, there's a co-host. What's up, dude?
Hey Mark, how are you? Sorry, I'm having
Hey,
internet problem. Sorry about that.
no worries.
Man, calling me a co-host on Ronnie's great show is I'm not quite there yet. I'm just here for just as a visitor,
Cool.
but I'm very stoked to see you though.
Right on.
Uh, very avid listener of your work.
Thank you.
So first things first. As I understand it, Mark, you're, as I see it, Sam in the background there. You're his booker or manager
Mhm.
or something.
Yeah,
Just
Sam's all over the wall. I got like 4 posters of him from the comedy shows I've been to. Yeah, I'm his booker.
So how did that work out? Did you just walk up to him and said, I will work for you? And he said, okay.
No, I didn't have any intention of working with him at all. I actually just went to a comedy show, and afterwards I gave him a book. I had a book that I was planning on giving him, and I gave it to him. It's a very short book. I'm like, if there's any book in my collection that Sam can read, it's this one. So I gave him this book, and it stuck with him because then a few months later, I was in his live chat on a Patreon episode he was doing, and I said, "Hey Sam, I'm the guy that gave you that book." I texted in the live chat, and he's like, "Oh, you're that guy. Come on the show. Email me. Blah blah blah." So then I'm like, "Wow, okay, cool. I'm about to talk to Sam Tripoli. What am I going to talk to him about?" And I don't know. I must have did good that first time because he had me back like 5 or 6 times to talk about other stuff on his Patreon, and then he had a spiritual podcast that he started right around that same time, and I was the third guest on his spiritual podcast Zero. And then afterwards he was like, "Hey, who do you think I should have next on this show?" And I sent him like a 10-15 point list of different people, and he was like, "Oh, cool. All right, well, maybe this guy could be my booker." Like, I didn't even send him that list thinking like, yeah, he's gonna pay me for this. I just love listening to his show so much that I'm like, well, if he doesn't talk to these people, then what the fuck is he doing? So yeah, it all came together really synchronistically, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of the same story I have with Ricky Varandas. I went
Nice.
on his Patreon podcast, and then he was like, maybe you should do a podcast. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And I had him on, and I've been on his podcast now, so it's
Yeah, right on. Yeah, Ricky's a cool guy. Ricky's actually not too far from me. He lives like the next state over.
okay. But America is big as like a big fucking country, so
Well,
I guess I
for
don't know
yeah,
what that means. It's like
yeah,
10 hours or
no, that's for New England, that's saying a lot. He's only 45 minutes north of me, so not far. Not
okay.
far.
That's
Yeah.
close.
If he was in like Florida, like my friend Juan from the Illuminati Confirmed show, that's like an 18-hour drive if I wanted to go see Juan, right? So comparatively, Ricky and I are much closer than than distance wise.
Yeah, New England's about 12 hours minimum from where I'm at in Michigan. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right on. Yeah, I've never been to Michigan, but I've driven south through like Ohio and Indiana. So I've almost been to Michigan, but never made my way north into Michigan.
Well, we moved here. We moved here from Indiana. It's you should give it a shot. You should come try it one time. It's fun if you like camping and outdoors and fishing, any of that.
Yeah, my buddy Chad Stemke lives there. He has a podcast called Esoteric America.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to check them out.
Well, we have a podcast called Esoteric America. I don't know why I said he has it. He's actually just one co-host on that show. One of 4.
Yeah,
So
the
you're
name
doing-
sounded. Go ahead, Ronnie.
So you're doing the same playbook as Sam Tripoli, just making podcasts like crazy.
Well, what's funny is, like some things just don't fit into the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast format. And I've gotten really comfortable with the way I do it now, with like me as the sole interviewer and one guest, possibly sometimes 2 guests. That's just been I just really like that style. But I don't want to give up on other formats. I like to try other stuff and be creative. So, yeah, that's why you see Illuminati Confirmed on the same feed as My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. That's kind of where I take things less seriously, and it's more about comedy than information on that show. And then Esoteric America would be sort of the guest has to present us information. So it's even more removed, where myself and the other 3 co-hosts are just sort of watching a presentation for most of the episode along with the audience and asking questions when necessary. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's quite like what Sam does, because Sam, from tinfoil hat to zero to, Cash Daddies to Union of the Unwanted to Conspiracy Social Club, like there's a huge variety. Me, like all my shows kind of still fit in the same lane, like the Cash Daddies is very different than Tinfoil Hat, and Tinfoil Hat's very different than Conspiracy Social Club. So I think Sam still has me beat by a long shot with the the range of shows he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's up on 7 different podcasts last time I heard or something. That's so crazy.
Yeah, that's a premium content too that he's counting there. And yeah, he's so busy, man. It's hard to get some guests scheduled on his show sometimes, but we make it happen. What he doesn't say is, for every 7 days a week that he does podcasts, 4 of those are booked by me. So I got to find somebody 4 or 5 days a week to talk to him. It's not always an easy job.
No, I can imagine me trying to find guests. It's really hard because I don't read much books. I guess you have the opportunity there to just look at the author and try to get them, but me as not a reader, I'm like, I've listened to 40 like different podcasts, but most of them are like big as fuck, so they don't even answer if you send something. So I don't know. It's hard.
It shouldn't be that hard. It's just about, and I don't know your professional background, but it's just about how you get your foot in the door. Like I came from other job backgrounds where you had to be a self-starter, you had to be someone who can push a sale to the end and make a deal with somebody. That's not easy. I used to do cold calls where I would knock on people's doors and ask them to donate money to save the environment, and that wasn't an easy job. But you sort of get an idea from working those jobs, like the subtleties of communication and how to how to flatter someone to do something, right? So if you're generally very nice and complimentary, you sort of can expect maybe people to be a little more kind and complimentary towards you, right? And then also, if you're asking people to be on your show, it's important to express the weight of why you reached out to them. if you're very flippant about reaching out to them, it doesn't matter if you're the biggest podcast in the world, they're probably not going to care because you didn't put much care into it. But if you reach out to them and say, hey, I love this book that you wrote, I love the concept, I haven't read it, but I love it, it's so interesting, can you please join me on your show to go into this further? I'd love to elaborate on that, like really just help them feel important, because authors, they spend so much time working on these books and then they send them out into the world, and they, half the time they don't get any feedback from their audience, like whether they like the book or not. They just know whether or not they sold the book, but that doesn't, I mean, I could buy 100 books and never read them, so I think, yeah, don't underestimate yourself as a podcaster. Like, even if you're not much of a book reader, you can still have really brilliant conversations with authors, and authors are always going to make themselves available to be on a podcast, because it's a great opportunity for them to sell books.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working on the floor, like building machines for farmers. So I don't have any skills like that, sales skills or something. But yeah, that should be. It's good tips though. I try to be funny. Like when I send some email, I try to do some joke or something. It doesn't always work. Like when I sent an email to you, I just bragged about who I had on, and it was like, okay. I mean,
Yeah, I the problem with that is, if I've never spoken to you before, I don't know that you're being, the context is everything. And there's a cultural difference too between humor sometimes too, right? So like what someone thinks is funny in Canada, someone in Chile might not think is funny. So yeah, I think take any approach you feel best, but generally I try to like keep it as short, simple, and to the point when I'm sending an email. And then by all means, when you have them on the Zoom, lay it lay it on them. Be as funny as you need to be, but yeah, no, I I don't know if this part is being recorded or if people are going to find this at all interesting, but if they are listening, I find this kind of stuff fascinating. I think self-improvement is something that we should all strive for, and we're all going to have a different approach to our own self-improvement. So there's no like one way is right. This is more like, hey, this is what I put in my souffle, what do you put in yours? And other people will listen and be like, yeah, I'm going to take some of that parsley from my souffle, you know.
yeah, and yeah, I'm recording. I've been recording for like an hour soon because we was
Cool.
talking, me and Christian, before. I
Cool,
don't know
cool.
if his internet is still working or not. So, but
Yeah.
Man, I'm sitting here getting a lot. That's what
Oh,
I'm doing.
he's
I'm
he's
listening to
he's still
everything.
here.
Please don't take food. Now my connection sucks.
yeah, he's the robot man coming in and out from time to time. But as I have you here, I got this recommendation from Christian when we talked about what we should ask you, and of course you have the podcast Illuminati confirmed. So let's talk some secret societies. What can we do? We have any new ones first of all?
New ones.
Can we get a background, Mark? Sorry, excuse me. Can we get a background where you're from and why you would know a lot of the things you know about the Illuminati?
All right, yeah. So I went to I'm trying to think of like some like scary sounding school to make up. No, why would I have all this knowledge? Great question. So I went to school like everyone else in America, public school at least. Maybe not all that common for where I'm from. A lot of kids that I grew up with went to private schools and whatnot. So I did sense this separation between like me and other people that definitely made an impact on my life as I grew older. Being in New England, for people who aren't from this part of the United States, they might not know that we have like most of the Ivy League schools here. And there's just this air of like, elitism in New England because people have money and they've had money for a couple hundred years now. Seeing as America's relatively new, we don't have like palaces and kingdoms and whatnot like you guys do over in Europe. But pretty close to that. So I grew up sort of in an area where there are very wealthy people, but then there are extremely impoverished people. And that always got my gears turning. Like, why is society like this? Why am I, uh, you know, for lack of a better word, as smart as I am, but am not being valued as a human being in this school system? Like I always knew I was smart, but I didn't understand why the school system that I was in wasn't like appreciating my intelligence. And I realized as I got older, it's because, oh, they didn't appreciate any of us. We were in public school. We weren't there to get smarter. We were there to become worker bees, right? Follow this certain model that they set up. So, I don't want to go off on too many different tangents, but you asked me a very sort of big question, so I'm trying my best to like answer it. But long story short, normal dude from Connecticut, always questioned things, always cared to learn, and I really despised my fellow students who like seemed to have like a disdain for learning, because like I had a disdain for the teachers and the way they taught, but I didn't dislike learning. Like I was the student who's like, this teacher just sucks. Like school doesn't suck, these teachers suck. So that was always my approach in life. And I always had the confidence to be like, well, if these idiots can't teach me, I'll figure it out myself. And nobody likes that kind of attitude. You get called a wise ass, you get called a know-it-all, you get called a, whatever, you name it. So I always had a lot of like resistance, and people are like, oh, he thinks he knows everything and whatever. But either way, I went to school and realized in community college that, oh, it's the same thing as high school all over again. What am I doing here? This is a waste of time. I need to figure out life. I need to start working, start making money, and start doing what I want to do. And around that time, I met a guy who happened to move all the way across the United States from the desert in Arizona all the way up to here in New England, Connecticut. It's just very sort of opposite place. And I ran into him serendipitously sitting on a park bench, smoking a joint, waiting for my next class to start. And he walks up to me, seeing my shirt that says, "Sure, you can trust the government. Just ask an Indian." And and it had a picture of Sitting Bull on it. And of course, we all know why you shouldn't trust the government, at least, especially if you're an Indian. But you know, that was the beginning of a long friendship. I actually just hung out with Amos last Sunday, and he basically explained to me why he moved to Connecticut from Arizona, and it was a very compelling reason. I'd never heard anybody have such a strange reason for doing anything in their life before. He told me that he moved all the way across the country because Skull and Bones, the secret society within Yale University, robbed the grave of Geronimo after he had passed away, almost 20 years after his death, robbed his grave and brought his skull and femur bones back to Yale University as a trophy for their secret society rituals. And, he said that to me in a matter of words, and it was shocking. I'm like, wow, okay, here's just stuff that I've learned a little bit about in books and on YouTube, and I've heard about these conspiracies, but this guy, he's not bullshitting me. He's a real person. He's standing right in front of me, and he's not lying to me. Like I could tell. I always was very street smart is such a corny term, but I had street smarts when I was a kid. I could tell who was lying to me, and I'm not like, I don't have a scotch-free record. I've been fooled. That's how you learn who's lying to you, right? So I knew Amos was someone who I could trust, and he had nothing to gain off me. So, it just really stuck with me. Like, why would they do this? And I'd already been fascinated with the world and how it operated. So when I realized, like, wow, okay, there's this whole zeitgeist of information waiting for me to look into, and the world's pretty much like keeping me from this stuff, it was like, boom, all right, I'm off to the races. Like, I know what I'm doing now. And I just kept learning, like reading books, learning about this stuff. And eventually, I found the Joseph Campbell archives, which was very helpful. And this was before I ever found podcasts. And I was only in my early 20s, so I was, partying and doing that kind of thing, hanging out with this frat, smoking weed every day, which hasn't stopped since, but I'm okay with that. And yeah, just like got into this lifestyle of like, oh, okay, I could do what I want and like live where I want and be what I want. And that's when I really started to take myself seriously with the research I was doing. I didn't think I was going to go to school to become an expert on this stuff, but I started to take myself more seriously. And like I said, working, studying, I eventually found podcasts, and that's when, the lid blew off because there's so much information in the podcast community being shared that benefited me immensely, like the Higher Side Chats, Tinfoil Hat, the Grimerica Show. You have hundreds of hours of conversations with brilliant people, most of the time, brilliant ideas, and so that helped. And that's, I guess, my background, so to speak. I mean, there's so much more that leads into why I'm sitting right here right now. But that's like the broad strokes of it for your general question.
Uh, I have a question about the skull that your friend was coming. Did he wanted to get it back, or what was the plan?
Yeah, so at first, Amos, he's this sort of rough guy. I don't know if they have bikers where you're from in Europe, but
Yeah, we
Amos
have
is
Hells Angels and those
oh,
guys.
okay, cool. So Amos, he's got that kind of appeal, like he's rough, he's that kind of guy, he's a nice guy, but on the outside when you look at him, you think, "Oh, this guy must be like a gangbanger or some kind of tough biker guy." And he's really just a sweet dude. Um, but looking at him, you're like, oh, he's a tough guy. So him and the people that he was talking to around that time period when I met Amos, that was the idea. Like, yeah, we're gonna break into that tomb, we're gonna steal the skull back, And I don't know exactly what made him change his mind on that, but I think he realized like that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to steal the skull back, because if I steal the skull back, that doesn't change anything. It doesn't leave Yale culpable. If anything, it just makes us criminals now, right? So um he never went any further with that kind of thinking of like, oh well, how do I break into this place and free his skull? Really, ultimately, it's a spiritual mission. If Yale's gonna return his skull and bones from where they are now back to his grave, then they're gonna have to do it in the light of day and let everybody know what they've done, confess to their crimes. So that's part of the thinking. And then also Amos realized that he wasn't being called to New Haven to steal Geronimo's skull back. He realized he was being called to New Haven to pray for Geronimo and pray so that these wrongs, could be righted and that these crimes could come and see the light of day. So it became much more than vengeance. It became a spiritual vengeance that he's seeking. And I'll tell you what, Yale, they've they've tried to mimic like the neo-Gothic architecture in France, so it looks very Euro when you're in the center of New Haven, Connecticut. These big tall spires and cathedral towers and clock towers and all of this is going on. And then you have this short, stout Native American man who walks through the city at 3 in the morning, stands in front of the tomb and screams, Geronimo, as loud as he can. He probably sends shivers down the spines of those kids going to school there. These kids are 18, 19, 20. They only hear little rumors that there are, stolen skulls in the tomb. So I think he's doing far more haunting the students than he is, you know, than it would be if he went and stole it. So yeah, it's sort of, I'm sort of making light of what he does, but it is, there's a truth to it. Like he doesn't, he kind of, yeah, he's kind of haunting, you know. And there's something cooler about it, that to just go and scream Geronimo's name and scare everybody. You know, I don't
So
know why it's more appealing.
this name Geronimo, it's something I've heard. I don't familiar who that guy is. So
Mm.
what's the significance about him?
So Geronimo, he is one of the most feared and revered figures in American history. Okay. So, what you got to understand about America is there are 44 million natives living here before Columbus ever stepped foot on his little ship. And there were plenty of world travelers who had been to North and South America before Columbus, right? We have the Templars, the Vikings, and the African kings. And so this whole idea that, oh, Columbus was the first, you know, that's all a lie. And there are so many other lies built into this history of the Native Americans here in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Central and South America, of course. But specifically my area, New England, had lots of Native Americans living here. And for the first like 100 to 200 years of the colony's history, there were a lot of different interactions with the Native Americans that by the pre-Civil War era, a lot of those Native Americans had either been forced off of their homeland or killed or sent to internment camps, slavery, you name it, bunch of bad things happened to them. So they were displaced. And Geronimo, being an Apache from Arizona, was one of the last few groups of people to have to face this, right? Because the further west, it took longer for the people to settle west, right? So he's out in the Wild West fighting the army, fighting settlers. They tried to capture him many, many times and he escaped, right? Almost every single time except for the last time, obviously. And he was not just like some bad dude. He was like larger than life. He was supernatural. There were stories that he got shot and pulled the bullet out with his own two fingers and threw it on the ground. He was fine. There are other stories that, you know, he could stand in between two signal towers, US Army signal towers, and be able to tell what they were signaling back and forth to each other, even though the guy never knew Morse code. He didn't, you know, allegedly didn't barely speak that well of English, but he's able to like read these guys' minds. So he was larger than life. There's plenty of stories about his might and bravery and heroic abilities. But at the time, the colonists were all very frightened of the Native Americans. They'd been told all this propaganda that the Native Americans were ruthless savages who were going to run into our towns and kill us and skin us alive, and all of this, you know, propaganda that uh, any combatant says about its enemy, right? And that's what the United States was. It was a combative force against the Native Americans, pushing them off their land, confining them to prison camps, aka reservations, and all of this went down while Skull and Bones and Yale University were sort of in their heyday as an institution. Skull and Bones had just been founded in 1832. So by the time the West was being won and they were fighting all these battles in the West, Skull and Bones was doing its thing, and Geronimo was in the newspapers. You know, oh, he's a bad guy. It'd be like if, you know, we went 10 years, 15 years ago when people were talking about Osama bin Laden, right? Oh, we got to get this guy. He's so bad. He's so mean. He blew up the towers. He's the worst. Meanwhile, the guy hardly had anything to do with it in actuality. And that's the same thing with Geronimo. So, you know, Geronimo became this like vilified outlaw. And then when he died in captivity. They actually put him on display at one of the world's fairs in an exposition. So that's kind of sad. But yeah, you know, he had biographers write books about him and stuff. So he's one of the most well-known Native Americans to have ever lived. And his name is remembered every time someone does a cannonball and jumps in a pool. They'll shout Geronimo, and that might be from the show The Ninja Turtles. I've also heard other people say that it's from the U.S. Air Force. The Air Force and the Army Rangers would say Geronimo as they jumped out of planes to give themselves courage. So there's a number of reasons why Geronimo would have been an appealing maybe candidate for their skull and bone rituals, but I think it was a part of their high magic that they're trying to commit against the Native Americans. It's a sort of like, we're not only going to take your land from you, but we're going to take your ancestors from you. And they're going to be our ancestors now. And no one's going to ever remember you existed. Like the same way Rome tried to do to the pagans, where you guys are at. But now what do you see? You see all these pagan groups who are coming out of the woodwork like, no, man, we've been practicing this stuff for thousands of years. And we just, went underground when the church threatened us. It's the same thing with a lot of the Native American groups. Unfortunately, though, they've been put onto these military reservations, so they haven't had the opportunity to sort of blend in and assimilate like the pagans did within European culture. Um, but yeah, I kind of went on a big diatribe there. Did you get your answers for Geronimo?
Yeah, for sure. And I was wondering where I heard about it. And yeah, it's when you're jumping in the water. I think I've heard about the Geronimo. Yeah.
Yep.
Christian, do you have the internet connection going?
Yeah, I have a little bit of it. I want to just interject. I want to interject before and say, yeah, kind of like what the Russians did to the Tartarians. I know that you.
It's really bad. We heard Tartaria, and that's just about it.
Yeah, what the Russians did with Tartaria. I don't want to go too far onto that because I don't know what context you're bringing it up in, but I'll just say I think some people are starting to feel suspicious about Tartaria. And I can say the record stands. Go back and listen to every podcast I've ever done about Tartaria. I've always made my skepticism clear about that subject. And one of the number one reasons why I'm skeptical about Tartaria is because of the Native Americans. We have all this so-called fake history of the United States, and before this made-up time period, there was these free energy, high technology, Tesla tech civilizations here. Give me a break. This is more racist propaganda trying to erase the Native Americans and what was special about them. I don't doubt that Tartaria could have existed in Russia, but to suggest that all of these like stately capitol buildings here in the United States were built like 500 years ago by some lost civilization and then the founding fathers just stole it all. I mean, that's ridiculous, and it's propaganda, and it's keeping people separated from understanding the true history of the United States, which is what these enemy powers want. They want to destabilize us. They don't want us to know about our Constitution in the United States and why it's so powerful. They don't want us to know that an alchemist named John Winthrop the Younger was basically the defender of our Constitution before we even became the United States of America. Like, I don't know. I learned that. Nobody seems to care about that. But I think it's pretty cool that an alchemist was involved in writing the Constitution. And it shows how intelligent the people of this country were, that they were using, things as advanced as alchemy. And I know maybe some people who are a little more materialistic are like, alchemy, that's just witchcraft and science. Ha ha ha. No, this guy, John Winthrop the Younger, was doing, high level experiments under what they would call alchemy in his day. But by any other name, it's science, right? And today we would call those types of things scientific experiments. So I don't mean to like, tie one off on Tartaria there, but I do definitely feel like it's it's being overblown, like there's sure there's evidence on maps and stuff that place existed in America, but or not in America, sorry. There's evidence that it existed in Eurasia, but whether or not they made it over to America, I I haven't really found anything beyond there's the one place in um the east coast of the United States, Nuremberg. There's one. And then there's another place on the west coast of Canada in British Columbia where the Russians had a civilization going back very long. So those two examples are possibly Tartarian in America. I'm not against that, but I don't think that we should just rewrite the Native American history and say, "Oh, that's all fake, that's all propaganda." They're actually like these like steam train building people who, all their stuff just disappeared. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just haven't seen the evidence, but the Tartaria stuff like hit the podcast community like a asteroid, and everybody just got obsessed with it for the past 2 years. And I think it was a fun way to distract ourselves from all the diabolical propaganda that was in the news about the juicy jab and all that, and just like taking our minds off of the chaos. And I totally did that myself. Like I stuck my head in the sand and avoided it because I knew I'd just get angry about the jabby juice conversation, and that's not the type of podcasting I'd want to do where I'm just like mad and angry. So I started talking about alternative history, and I'm really glad that Tartaria came up as a topic, not just here, but in general over the past of 2 years, because it really got me to re-examine the actual history of America. And I've not totally disproven Tartaria, but I found enough evidence here in New England, at least, that supports at least 500 years of history, probably more. There are some stone structures here that go back thousands of years. They just don't have a lot of archaeologists who pay attention to them because they don't fit into a political narrative. But yeah, I'm really grateful that Tartaria became a topic of interest for people because, like I said, it got me to look into my local history and be like, nah, Tartaria wasn't here, and I could prove it. I got books, I got stone structures to prove it. The Templars probably were, and that makes more sense. Tartaria being a psyop in Russia. Who knows? Maybe the Russians were like, screw these Americans, let's throw them for a loop. Let's get them to forget their actual history. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's a little bit of both, where it's actually a forgotten civilization, but it never made its way here. There's so many possibilities. I think we need to just be careful in these situations to be like, if it's a psyop, are we wasting our time on it? But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because it has been like for a while, it's been very popular, and only in the past few months I've noticed like people who were making Tartaria content now turning tail and saying, I think this was all a psyop. And I have books about Tartaria, and there's some of the most poorly cited books I own. Like the references in the back, the sources in the back are not good. So that doesn't say much about these researchers if they're not even able to put a good bibliography together. Like if you can't even cite your sources, and how can I trust that you're even writing a nonfiction book? Like this could all be fiction for all I know. There's no sources.
Yeah, and yeah, Christian is writing in the chat, by the way, if you want to see what he has to say. He
I
said,
noticed.
yeah, he said you got the gist of what he was about to ask.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, the Tartaria thing is I've felt it's a bit like Q, but they didn't get everybody, so they put another one in.
Right.
So if you didn't fall for Q, you went to Tartaria instead of
Well, and what's
raging
interesting
against the
about
machine.
what's interesting about Tartaria is it fits into like two key conspiracy like genres of like rewritten history and free energy, right? Because those two things were like molded together in the Tartaria concept. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm totally in agreement that, like, oh, in the past, we definitely had more advanced technology. Whether that means that all the advanced technology was built by one group of people and they were all conveniently erased from history, like, you know, in one fell sweep, it just seems like that's too much. But who knows, maybe we were onto something and that's why they're tying it back like, no, it's just a psyop now. Because I think there's a potential with these psyops for people to actually make really great breakthroughs to understand the world in a way that they might not have been able to before that so-called psyop. If anything, these psyops are like distractions, keeping people, focused on something for just long enough so that their focus stays away from other things, like, who knows, maybe the election or some other political objective that they had in the past 2 years. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's important
If
to,
you if can I ask if you have read about like and looked at the citations where they get the information, is the orphan kids like the orphan trains, is that a thing? Like, I mean, that's weird if it happened, if they
that's the thing about this. So
moved around a bunch of kids.
I think that's the trouble with a psyop is like they can't invent it all out of whole cloth, right? They're not just like making all of this up out of like spinning it out of thin air. What they do is they take things that maybe are lesser known and weave them into a narrative so that you go out and you reestablish the narrative instead of the evidence, right? So instead of going out and saying like orphan trains were a thing, you're saying no, Tartaria is a thing because we found out about the orphan trains, right? You see the difference?
Yeah.
It's almost controlling the disclosure, right? Because they're telling us about these orphan trains, but then they're confusing people thinking it was a part of this other thing. And then when the whole Tartaria thing gets established as a hoax, well, now the orphan trains that were real and did establish Tartaria as a real thing are now considered a hoax too. So it could be weaponized in that way where they include some things that they want people to forget about. They include them in this new psyop just long enough so that when they're able to shut the psyop down, all of the good stuff goes with it, like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? So that's kind of literally what we're doing with the orphan train thing, possibly, because, yeah, I mean, I just talked about that. The Native Americans were pushed all over the place. They were rehomed on reservations, and in a lot of cases they didn't end up with their own family members. They ended up with other tribes and things like, groups of people they weren't familiar with yet. So and the same thing happened to European immigrants when they came to New England and the East Coast, because there was so little for them to do. They had to ship them out to places where they could work, right? So the orphan train thing is really more about the desperate situation of the working class and the lower class throughout the course of the you know history of this country. Like, we just don't talk about poor people generally because poor people are never writing any history books. Who wrote books back 100, 200 years ago? Only the elite could even spend, have the luxury of having time to write a book, right? So, up to 100 years or older, certain books are you got to look at them in the context. And I think the best information on the orphan train stuff would be in newspapers, and there's a lot of newspaper evidence for these orphan trains. And like, you could just see it because it'll say in the newspaper archives in the ads like children for sale, like, like it'll have like an ad for it. So I don't know if we can say everything within the umbrella of Tartaria deserves to be there.
Hmm. So when we talk about hidden history, you're familiar with Graham Hancock, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about his? He's basically talking about the same thing, that civilization that was pretty much they had to have some technology that we don't use today when they built the pyramids, and his suggestion is they got wiped out by a meteor like 11,000 years ago or something like that.
Well, it's not really a suggestion. It's more of a he's showing that meteor hit, right? They found evidence for this stuff. They found geological evidence for these impacts. I think really they're unable to make conclusive declarative statements about their research because they exist within a paradigm that doesn't support their conclusions. The paradigm of archaeology is to prove the established narrative. It's not to disprove it. Anybody who's trying to disprove the established narrative of history is subject to what? Blackball, subject to discreditation, subject to mockery, subject to being called a quack, which is what real who people who consider themselves real archaeologists would think of, like guys like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Meanwhile, someone like you or I, who I don't know your academic background, but myself dropping out of community college, I could listen to Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and learn far more than I ever could listening to one of these uptight archaeologists doing one of their dumb TED Talks where they're basically speaking to 30 people. They're only speaking to people who have spent the same amount of time researching as them, because they're speaking this like language almost, like they've contextualized what they're doing to a certain degree that it becomes unattainable to the layperson, and that's intentional. They want to make a separation between reality and what the lay people understand. So I think when we see Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, not being supported by those mainstream archaeological and anthropological and historical institutions, it's because all of those institutions are instituting a narrative. They're not trying to honestly record history. We have this, misidentification that these groups are meant to preserve history. No, they're meant to preserve a political narrative that's been preserved throughout history to keep power in the hands of a few. So I don't know the ins and outs of Graham and his peers' research and their conclusions. I do know that like the Younger Dryas uh, time period, like they've proven that that was a real thing, so it's just whether or not the mainstream folks want to accept that, right? Because they're still thinking that, well, before the Tigris and Euphrates civilization, human beings were Neanderthals, and then they ate some kind of mushroom or cooked a fire, and then all of a sudden, because they're cooking with fire, their brains are now smarter and they can do all this stuff. There's just so many missing pieces in the mainstream explanation for our history that, you know, we're never going, I don't think we're ever going to find any, it's just with Graham and those guys, they're not going to be accepted by that because they're so far afield from that by now that they've shown that, hey, that's not worth our time. Let's look at this new understanding of our history. But to get to a more specific facet of it, because I'm kind of speaking like philosophically here, I believe the best explanation I've heard for the building and the construction of these megaliths is that they use geopolymers that we still don't have. And we have evidence for this with the Romans, who built a type of concrete that we still can't replicate today, right? We know that they used concrete
Is
to
that
build
the
aqueducts.
underwater concrete?
Well,
Or
there's a bunch of, I mean, it wasn't just used underground. The aqueducts, which were not underground structures, were made of this concrete, right? An aqueduct, as far as I've seen in school books and stuff, it's like a highway you know, like this bridge that carries water right above ground, and then through a city it might go underground. But the aqueducts were constructed with this type of concrete that we still can't replicate today with modern concrete creation, right? I'm not a concrete expert, but there are levels of density to concrete, and they had this super strong concrete. And one person I spoke to who will be, oh, his name's Topher, and he will be appearing on my show very soon. The episode will be out this month. He explained that there is a archaeologist who figured out how they do these geopolymers, and they theorized that the stones on the pyramid and all these other megalithic structures, they were built basically by pouring them into place and
Yeah,
shaping them,
I've seen a documentary about this. They
right?
supposedly melted with what's the name in English? Sunglass, like the thing that the sun is like going into
Mm.
the glass and then burning it.
Yeah, yeah. So one theory is that they would pour black pigment into the solution, the mixture of the geopolymer, because the theory is that the pyramids had a black casing. They were black on the outside. So if you have a black surface in the hot desert, that's going to amplify the sun on that, you know, and then basically cook it, right? Like you're in a kiln, like you're in one giant kiln. And then if you went one step further and you had a magnifying glass, like you're
Ah,
saying,
yeah.
and you
Mhm.
took the magnifying glass and you pointed the sun's beam exactly where you wanted it and concentrated the power of the sun, absolutely, that could be how they did it. I mean, it seems more plausible that they would have poured the ingredients into place than you know, picked up these huge blocks, because some of these blocks are like 40 tons solid, right? There, it's impossible to have carried them from one place to another. They must have been levitated, right? And I have heard theories that people can levitate these objects using frequency, basically canceling gravity, and uh and then these objects, these stones, become as light as a feather, and you can just pick them, push them. That's a little bit more hard to imagine than something like a geopolymer. I don't know if you've ever played around with like mud as a kid and stuff, but yeah, everybody can imagine like, oh, okay, yeah, you take something that's liquid and it solidifies and you burn it and it becomes solid, you know, and the pyramids actually move with the earth. Like they're built in such a way that when an earthquake comes, they don't like they don't turn into these like parallelogram structures that like our houses today. If there's an earthquake, our whole house will shake and the roof and the floor will not be like matched up with each other. They'll kind of go in different directions, like a parallelogram, kind of turning back and forth. So these pyramids and a lot of these structures were built in such a way that when an earthquake hit, the force of the earthquake would roll over the structure. It wouldn't like move the structure around. It would roll with the structure. So these these groups of people were so advanced compared to where we are now. It just adds more credence to the thought that, oh, we're living in a sort of control paradigm. Because if we weren't living in an under controlled paradigm, don't you think our evolution would have been concurrent? It would have kept growing, we would have kept progressing. It seems like we've only devolved, we've deprogressed from that greater period, as a species where we were building huge miraculous structures. I think we've been controlled since then and led to become lesser than.
Yeah, and that you can see that pretty much today too. If we go forward like 20 years, I think already in 20 years, if you use cell phones as much as we do today, we are gonna have a serious problem in society because people are going to be so stupid. So if something breaks down, pretty much a whole city can die because nobody can repair shit. They just know the top things, but you don't know how the bottom works. So if
Right.
that breaks, the whole society breaks. So I can see how that would basically could do the same with that technology. if you just learn how to use it, like on the top level, and don't know how it works, if it breaks, you can't use it, and the society dies. Or we get hit with an astronaut, or whatever happens. But
Yeah, I'm not a prepper, so I'm just sort of optimistic and hoping that the world stays okay long enough for me to get my homestead going, you know. But who knows? Maybe the world will end in the meantime. But I'm definitely not set up for that.
You're all welcome on my homestead.
Right
Oh,
on.
brother.
Right on. Yeah, I don't know. I try to think that the world's gonna end up okay, and like all this stuff is just like a part of our growth, you know? Like when you traumatize a plant and it grows stronger, or it grows in a way that, like, because you imprinted on it, you know, like that's kind of what's happening on a large huge scale right now. It's like, and not to excuse any evil or anything, I definitely don't excuse evil acts, but in a way, the terrible side of what's going on in humanity is like propelling us towards growing past it, right? Because we see now for the first time more than ever, being more interconnected than ever, how we can all affect each other negatively and positively, and what that actually, you know, means, right, to be able to get in front of that and make some positive adjustments. So I think we're gonna have to go through the worst of it first before we get to the better of it. But yeah, I think we're all kind of going towards something greater, not worse. But the big propaganda, the big lie, is to keep us all afraid and scared and thinking that the world's going to end. And it used to be like this religious idea that the world's going to end because God's going to come back and do what he did in the Bible and everything, and send us, you know, all these plagues and, you know, all these bad things will happen, and only this elite few will be saved. Now they've shifted that to like, you know, the planet Earth is dying, and she's going to kill us all with natural disasters if we don't take care of her, right? Like they've totally taken that idea and they've just put it into a new context for the new mindset of the global neo human, right? That's what we're all becoming, is humans, as one collective consciousness, whether you believe in the globe or the flat plane, whichever. I heard recently on I think it was tinfoil hat. Yeah, tinfoil hat, the last episode, esoteric Eddie said the whole world is shaped like a donut. So there's that too.
there's a good documentary about that. It's called what the fuck is it now? I can
All right.
see. No, it's a fuck. I see the picture. I watched it. It's next. No, not. Oh, whatever. They are talking about the energy that's like the Tesla energy, and it's free energy, and it's going through like the Earth. Yeah, it's a donut, and it's going through, and that's why they had the 6 feet stay away, because people have the same thing.
Taurus, right? Isn't it a
Yeah,
Taurus?
yeah, and it's such a good documentary. But I don't know the name for it.
Oh, you're trying to think of the name of the documentary.
Yeah, I
Oh,
watched
you'll
two
get
of
it.
them, and no, yeah, fuck.
It'll come back to you. Yeah, there's a lot, like we were saying with the Tartaria stuff. It seems to be a big topic of interest these days. All these different technologies, free energy technologies. It's always been a topic of interest amongst human beings. They've just suppressed it so much. Now that we have the internet, and all of these guys are out there tinkering away, making inventions and things, like they're not going to hide it as much as they could in the past, because in the past one of these guys would be in relative, you know, darkness, and then once he invented something cool, he'd have to go and show it to everybody. Nowadays people can like show their failures and their successes on the internet and have a track record of like, yeah, I built this, didn't work, I built this, didn't work, but then I figured out that this works. And now, I mean, one guy that I'm thinking of right now, I think his name is like Parker something, and he's on Instagram, and he made this Tesla tech in his backyard, and it's this big conductor of some kind, and it spins and it conducts all this energy, from the earth, and then it shoots it out with the radio wave to other people near him who have these similar devices that are then like taking that energy and storing it in these batteries, and then they're able to use that to power their appliances in their home and stuff, and it's totally off the grid. And because this kid can just do this relatively peer to peer, where he's teaching other people how to build into his system, and it's all like, do it yourself, cost is yours. If you want it, pay for it yourself, kind of thing. um it's I think creating a system that the commercial system is not going to be able to compete with, because they're relying on the monopoly that the energy companies have. But if all of a sudden everybody's going and building their own devices because this guy and other people are smart enough to show you how, well, pretty soon, right under their noses, we're all going to be on our own power grid. And then they're going to threaten us and say, oh, well, we're going to shut the power grid off. And we'll say, do it. We got our own. We could turn ours on, right? Like, I think that's what we need to start doing as groups on the internet, is creating backup systems, so that what you described earlier, where, oh, well, this guy's a, you know, jack of all trades, but expert in nothing. And like some of these people have been relying on only him for so long. Like, we need to start spreading that knowledge around so that we have people who are capable in all realms, especially in the basics, building devices that help us with our basic human needs. Because, yeah, the communication grid and the internet is all great, but if you can't shelter yourself, drink water, and find food, you're not going to be able to watch YouTube videos for very long. So, yeah, I think we need to reestablish those values using the tools we have now, because we're going to be twice as strong if we do it now instead of when it's too late, when they shut the grid off and say, oh, you've been bad, you don't get to use this anymore. It's like, let's use it now while we have it.
Yeah, and that's why it sucks that I don't remember the name, but I would like to know how, because they had some guy from Africa that has made a battery that runs by itself and stuff like that. So
Are you talking about Foster Gamble's documentary? A guy named Foster Gamble made a documentary.
depends on the name.
Yeah,
They had two. They made one and two.
yeah.
First they made the first one was like how the system is run, and the second one was what to do about it, and that was a lot about free energy. And they went to a few different societies that had some free energy type stuff devices.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Thrive on.
Yes, try one and two. Yeah,
Thrive, yeah.
yeah, those was great. But I
Yeah,
don't know if they have these devices. Shouldn't they be coming up soon that we can buy them somewhere?
yeah. Well, there's ways you can build them yourself. Like I'm saying, if you're in the know-how, you can build them using parts that you buy. And you know, whether or not it's gonna work depends on how skilled you are. But yeah, I think when it comes to these devices, like there's so many different brilliant people doing stuff in many different realms, like from health to energy to, I mean, really those are the two main ones, right? You want energy to fuel your life, whatever it is you're fueling, whether it's your vehicle, your home, your grid, your own personal grid. And then your health is the second, I mean, the most important thing, first before that, because we are being toxified constantly by our environment. So if we don't have these intelligent ways of dealing with our now technologically toxic environment, we need to, create some maybe technological ways of detoxifying it, right? Is that making sense? And I don't mean to be rude and look at my phone. I'm just making sure that Sam has some information that
It's all
he
good.
needs.
Yeah, you definitely make sense, but Yeah, I think I was not planning about talking about this, but this has been fun. But it's getting late here, and I think I've had you for an hour, so I'm not gonna take more of your time.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Mark, for coming on and promote everything you have.
Thank you for having me. I apologize for the misunderstanding, and I'm glad we were able to get an hour in. If people want to hear more from me, they can go to myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. No apostrophe. You don't use apostrophes in the URL, so I didn't do the apostrophe. And then, of course, wherever you're listening to this, you can find our show, whether it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And if you're really cool, you'll go on Rockfin and Patreon to listen to the show.
Alt Media United.
Yes, and Alt Media United, which I don't think we have your show on Alt Media United yet, unless I forgot. And if we haven't, then we got to make a page for you on our site. It's free to join. Anyone listening who has a podcast is welcome to hit me up. I'll send you our info submission form. You send me back all the info about your podcast, and then I'll make a page for you on the site. And there's probably a few people who are like, yeah, I did that already. Well, I've been busy. I'm going to get to those 5 or 6 podcasts this week. But yeah, Ronnie, I'd love to have you a part of it.
Yeah, I sent you an email back a month ago, I think.
Right.
It's no worries. I'll send again.
You're one of the few people who have been waiting, and I will make your page very soon. So yes, altmediaunited.com. Go there if you're looking for some new podcasts. You know, they don't have a conspiracy or a spirituality or any of these cool genres on any podcast apps. So just go to our website and you'll find all this stuff there. You know, a bunch of podcasts in the same vein as this one.
Fantastic. And 2 things before we leave. Christian's podcast is Searching for Starseed.
Yes.
And he doesn't need a good internet to do his own show, so that's always good. And one question, why are you burning your weed and not smoking it? I don't get it.
Where was I burning it?
You're lighting it up and not doing anything about it and just putting it down.
Like this, and then
yeah. But yeah, now you took
He
it.
doesn't smoke, Mark. He don't smoke, man. He don't understand.
like the way it's coming out like this.
No, I was just thinking you're just sitting there lighting it up and don't smoke it. I'm a smoker, so if I light a cigarette, I smoke the whole thing and just leave it. But just lighting it and then putting it back and picking it up again, and I was like, this is confusing.
You caught me, you know, this is part of my nervous habits of being on a show. I seem like I'm not nervous, but yeah, you caught me. I like to smoke while I'm doing this, but I also don't want to like choke on the smoke because I'm talking, you know, so I have to like light it, let it sit, take a hit, keep talking. And also, you know, I'm not too worried about wasting. There's a certain like thought that, you know, the smoke is going to a good place. So whether it all goes in my lungs or not, I don't mind.
Okay, yeah, that's a weed guy's mentality, I guess.
Yes.
Everything about the plant's therapeutic, my friend.
Yeah, it's like incense, you know, it's like having incense burning too, you know.
It smells so bad though, so that's so good.
Where are you right now? You're in Europe, you probably can't say.
I'm in Finland, so yeah.
Yeah, you can't. If you did have weed, you couldn't say, right? Because it's a no-no up there, huh?
It's a very big no-no, yeah.
But that's my point, though. If you had, if it was legal, you'd have better smelling bud. You guys just have that like
I have been
kind
to
of brown
Amsterdam.
Romanian bud or something.
maybe. I've been to Amsterdam though, so I know. I think they have good stuff. I'm not sure. It's legal over there, so
20 years ago they did.
okay.
I heard they roll their weed up with rose petals over there.
Oh.
Like it's fake
I thought
weed?
about trying that too. No, it's real weed. They just do it as a filler.
Yeah, rose petals
I think
are
Britain.
not bad. You could smoke rose petals.
We put
I would
tobacco
definitely
in
try
ours here.
Yeah,
weed
me
and
too.
tobacco.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, let's end it on this small weed chat. Have a great day, everybody, and Yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
will
get
see each other
service for the weed
in the
chat.
future.
Right on.
All right, you guys take care. Have a
Yes.
good night, man.
Have a good
Nice
night.
talking to you guys. Peace.
Peace.